podcast, an inside look at California politics and the state legislature. I'm your host, Assemblyman Josh Hoover. Very excited today to be joined by Brian Marvel, president of the Peace Officers Research Association of California, which we will from now on refer to as PORAC.
Yes.
Because that is a mouthful, but love the work that PORAC is doing. Welcome to the podcast, Brian.
No, thanks for having me. It's a great opportunity to talk about issues that you're dealing with firsthand at the legislature, and obviously some of the stuff that we're trying to push.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about, your background, like what you've been working on at PORAC, just generally how you maybe got to this, where you're at as president of PORAC. And I know you were also a PD in San Diego, correct?
Yes. So the military brought me to San Diego. When I got there, I was like, I'm not leaving. So I
love San Diego.
I got out of the Navy and joined the San Diego Police Department and went overseas for a little bit. I came back, decided to get into the police union business in 2007. I ran for my board, didn't think I was going to get elected down there, and I did. And 2 years later, I was the president of the SDPOA.
Wow.
And, unfortunately, we dealt with a pension crisis down there, which was a tremendous amount of work. And we got through that. And then in 2018, decided to run for PORAC and became the PORAC president. And we have the crisis in America over policing. And so I went from the pension crisis in San Diego to the national crisis on policing over the last 15 years, which has been a lot of work. But it's great. It's great to represent all the peace officers in California. I think, California gets a lot of grief, but I think we're doing it right here in the state when it comes to law enforcement and public safety. And, with the support of you and other members of the legislature, it's made it a little bit easier. I mean, obviously, it's been extremely difficult. And, I look at it, we're on the front line of the public safety with the communities and stuff, but you're on the front line up at the legislature on some of these crazy bills we see.
Yeah, I got to go present today. We're recording this on a Monday, or not today, sorry, tomorrow in public safety again. So, which is always an experience, right?
Yeah. And, it's so interesting because, just over the last several years, there's been so many bills.
Yeah.
We normally have like maybe 5, 10 like high priority bills for us, but over the last, it's been like 50.
It's incredible.
60. And, we monitor 400 plus bills a year over the session.
Yeah.
And it's nice this year. Obviously, being an election year is big. So
it kind of slows things down a bit.
Well, the pendulum was so far over, and now it's sort of coming back to where we're starting to have rational, common sense discussions on public safety.
Yeah, I've been seeing that, and even just from last year to this year, I feel like we've seen a slight shift. Some of that is, the makeup, for example, of the Public Safety Committee itself, but just even the general conversation, I feel like, has come back to some more in the middle at least, if not, swinging the other direction, hopefully.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, whether you believe crime's going down or crime's going up, the reality is I think we've all seen it firsthand. And I think that plays a big part in it, and especially for people that are running for re-election for office. All the polling I've seen, crime, homelessness are always 1 and 2 top issues. So I think the focus now is we need to start dealing with some of this stuff. We were so hasty in passing legislation to reform and be pro-criminal. Now we're like, hey, maybe we went overboard. We need to start thinking about the victim, which sadly is left out in a lot of these conversations.
Absolutely.
And was definitely left out over the last several years. So to have them back in the conversation, to be like, hey, we want community safety. We just don't want to continue to protect these people that are breaking the law, I think is paramount when it comes to legislation.
And that's what I hear the most from my constituents, right? I mean, obviously safe neighborhoods, reducing crime, reducing homelessness. These are the big issues. And, I do think it's really interesting because there was a period where we had, really done a lot to address crime, and we got kind of comfortable. And then, certain legislators or lawmakers or whoever, a lot of different levels of government decided, what's with all these laws, Yeah. and just started reforming and changing everything. And now we're seeing it, go up again. And I think that's the result. So.
And I think it's
tough.
important to note that, like an organization like PORAC, and maybe unlike other organizations, is we really want to focus on evidence-based type of research and analysis before we start changing things. And one of the things that we saw over the last several years was, they wanted to reform policing, that they would pass a bill and then they would pass a bill the following year to change the bill that they passed last year. And I always try to tell the folks on your side and on the elected side is like, hey, when you make a change to law enforcement, it doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
This is something that you're talking maybe 1, 2. When you're looking at large agencies, like my agency is a little bit under 2,000 people. You can't train 2,000 people in less than a year. So magnify that for the CHP, LAPD, LA sheriffs. And it takes years to get all of those people trained up. And when you're making monumental changes to the way that law enforcement is going to function in California, that's a generation. You're talking about a generation of police officers that have to go through, get trained, and start to actually utilize that out in the street is going to take a long time.
Yeah.
So when you continually make these changes, we never even know if the first change you made was even successful. And now you're making another change, and we can't even determine whether that first change was good. That's not good policy making.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of what I appreciate about the work PORAC is doing. Is it is very evidence-based, and you're very strategic in how you engage on legislation, which I always appreciate. So I want to talk a little bit more about what PORAC is, cares about and is working on this year. But I wanted to get your take on a few things first, if you're cool with that. So we've been doing. We'll start with our question of the week. So every week, or not every week, but most weeks, we've been throwing out a Twitter poll essentially for people to go and vote on. So this week, you can go to @PointOfOrderPod on our X or Twitter account and vote on this. The question is going to be: should California increase penalties for protesters who willfully block traffic and shut down major highways? This obviously comes from a big story in this last week of the protests that shut down the Golden Gate Bridge. It's pretty much been met with quite a bit of bipartisan frustration. But it was just, from a public safety standpoint, a huge problem, obviously for emergency vehicles, for people trying to get to their maybe doctor or their even their job, obviously, as well. So a colleague of mine, Assemblywoman Kate Sanchez, has introduced a bill to increase some of the financial penalties for these protesters. But I know even the DA in San Francisco is trying to get creative on, charging these folks for what they did. And so I don't know if you saw that story, but I mean, what do you do as law enforcement, right? What is the best approach in this situation?
I personally think that it needs to be addressed right away. I think when you have an issue where people are going to get out on the street, hopefully law enforcement has intel prior to it happening so they can stage and be prepared for when it does happen. They can immediately address it and take care of it. Obviously, if they don't have it and they show up, I think they need to address it right away. Unfortunately, I think over the last several years, what you've seen is police have had to back away because the elected officials, the district attorneys have, they've made the police the enemy, and law enforcement is reluctant to be like, hey, we gotta do something. But if I hold somebody wrong or I try to put them in handcuffs, I got a DA who's going to charge me with assault or something like that. So I totally agree that this needs to be addressed because you are dealing with public safety issues. People need emergency medical services. Law enforcement needs to get to places. And when you block this traffic, you almost, especially in the Bay Area, that is just so congested. It's very difficult for public safety to move around when there's congestion on the freeways because people that live in those communities, they know the back roads. And also with the new like Google Maps and Waze, they tell you all the other stuff. So you get a lot more traffic on the side streets. I think, obviously the First Amendment and protesting is a civil right in America. But the reality is does that civil right give you the right to block somebody to get life-saving care? That's the question.
And I think that's where, there has to be a line drawn of some kind, right? And so, and it's amazing. I was watching some of the clips too of just the creativity of, these protests where they poured concrete and they had these barrel. I mean, they
Yeah.
basically had a blockade going.
Absolutely.
And I think it was the CHP that responded, but
They did.
my gosh, whoever these officers are that are able to handle this, and a lot of the protesters really, they obviously all have their cameras out, and they try to make it look as kind of dramatic as possible because they want that reaction, right? And they want and so it is such a tough issue for these officers that have to respond to that. I really feel for them. Because I know that they're in that mindset where it's like we got to be careful, obviously, public perception, but also we have to address this problem.
Yeah, they're doing phenomenal work, and the fact that they have to be out there and deal with this situation. And you talked about the video piece of it, and those protesters, they're masters of editing it to make it look like the officer did wrong.
Absolutely.
When in reality, the officer did the best he possibly could to make sure that they weren't injured. They were able to get them safely out of the freeway. And they were able to open the freeway up so the rest of the people that are going to work, need life-saving treatment or doing what they want to do can continue to go on and do their business. So hands down, I think they did a phenomenal job. Our big point is we need the legislature to allow us to do it, to get in there, to handle it and get it removed. And the protesters are free to protest in parks, sidewalks, wherever. Just don't interfere with traffic.
Yeah, no, the camera piece is interesting too because, and I wonder, if you feel if this has affected recruitment in any way. But obviously, the body cam issue was a big one, and in California, we've really implemented a lot of that, and I think that accountability is good. But in terms of, just constant cameras, not the body cams, but everywhere else, and kind of these, so it's like you're constantly being watched. I imagine that this is a tough job to decide, hey, I want to go do this. When you started, it was probably a little different.
Absolutely.
Now, if you're a young person wanting to go into law enforcement, you're thinking about these things. Like, do I want to put myself, even if I do everything possible to do the right thing, and still mistakes can happen and stuff like that. And so it's got to be really stressful and got to be tough career path to pick at this point.
It is, and it's dramatically affecting recruiting in a sense. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Is you have all these videos out there, and I don't have an issue with people videoing. All I ask is that you give the officer his space that they need to perform their job efficiently and effectively. Because a lot of these folks that are videoing, they feel like they can be like right in your face. I can put the camera right here. And it's
exactly.
like, it's like, no, you can't really do that. Give us our space. Just outside of just naturally Americans as a whole, we like a little bit of space around us. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
But it's difficult because you're right. The generation that's coming up now, it's like, they want to be liked. Everybody wants to be liked to some fashion. But it's like as soon as you pin the badge on, now I'm hated, and you have
you're like target. Yeah, you're putting a target on yourself.
So how do we overcome that? I think it takes elected officials like yourself, which you've always had positive comments about us and the work that we're doing. But it would be nice to see all of the elected officials, and I know that's not a possibility, but to talk positively about the profession. We need the younger generation to choose law enforcement. We need people to come into this profession because, the abolition movement is just an utter joke. That is like a non-starter. You need law enforcement. You need policing. We need the best people possibly wanting to become peace officers to serve their communities, to make them more vibrant, to make them safe. You're seeing it in Oakland. You're seeing it in San Francisco. These businesses are leaving because it's unsafe for their workers. It's unsafe for the business. And that's what happens when you decimate police agencies. You lose the public safety. They've literally acquiesced to the criminal element of this state, and it's very unfortunate to see it happening.
And I say it all the time too. It's when we speak in broad terms, or when anyone speaks in broad terms, like demonizing a specific profession, in this case, obviously law enforcement, it really undermines what I think really needs to happen, which is we need to create positive relationships between communities and police, right?
Yes.
And you can't really do that when you paint them as the enemy, right? And that's why I'm such a big supporter of school resource officers, because obviously for school safety, number one, first and foremost, that's why I support them. But secondly, it gives these students an opportunity to meet an officer and build a relationship with an officer in a way that you might not get in a traffic interaction, right? Or
Yep.
some sort of something later in life. You actually can develop a positive relationship with someone in law enforcement. And I think, people will quickly realize, hey, these are people too.
Yes.
This is my neighbor or my community member, just like me. They just happen to be protecting me and have a badge. But, it's that's kind of my
I agree with you.
frustration.
I think school resource officers are a phenomenal tool. I think cadet programs in high school
Yeah.
would be a great program to get started in high school. I know a lot of places have them, but I know a lot of school resource officers. Not only do they provide the security and safety for the students while they're in the school, a lot of them are mentors
Yeah.
to
Oh, yeah.
these young kids that are having difficulties at home, having difficulties at school, and they're mentoring them to be able to be like, stay in school, get your diploma, and try to work hard to achieve what you want to achieve. And unfortunately, you have a group out there that just continually paints us in a bad picture, and they'll take one incident and replay it over and over
Yeah.
to where then that leads people to believe that this is happening on a
Yeah.
much broader base. In reality, it's less than 1%,
Yep.
if that.
I mean, I'm trying to imagine, there's been a couple legislators over the years that have been caught up in corruption scandals or, big, gone to prison or whatever. If you took those instances and tried to paint that
Yeah.
across every legislator,
Yeah.
obviously it wouldn't be fair.
True.
And I think, it's the same for law enforcement,
Yeah,
right?
it
You've
is.
got obviously things that should not have happened, but to paint that across every officer is just wrong. So,
Yeah, and then, unfortunately, the media is a big driver of it.
Yeah.
You can see it, like, the incident in Minneapolis. It was a story that
Yeah.
ran on for months and months and months and months. But you know what? If a peace officer saved a baby life, that's like a
Yeah.
24-hour
Yeah,
story.
exactly. Yeah.
And peace officers are doing that every day
Yep.
in the United States, and we're making millions of contacts every day in the United States, and
Yeah.
you don't see it.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Unreported anything.
Yeah.
It went
Yeah.
smoothly. It went perfectly.
Yeah, don't hear those stories.
Don't hear the stories on it.
No, it's a great point. So, anyone that wants to vote on that poll, should California increase penalties for protesters who willfully block traffic and shut down major highways? You can go to @PointOfOrderPod on our Twitter or X page. I still like to call it Twitter, and answer that there. Moving into our stories of the week. One story I was majorly focused on. So I had worked on this audit of homelessness spending that came out a couple weeks ago. Last week, just a week after that, Newsom announced another $200 million in spending for homelessness in California. He also, though, to his credit, promised that we got to hold local governments accountable for that money, because that was the big rub in the audit we asked for, was that we're not tracking any of this money, and I think I said it before, but if you are a taxpayer or if you are an advocate for the homeless, you should care where that money is going, right? And so I was just curious, your thoughts, but
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think any dollar spent for homelessness should be audited. I think every grant or federal or state spending on homelessness programs should be audited, because if you're not auditing the program, you're not determining its success.
Yeah.
And I remember a while back, and I was shocked. The LA Times actually did a story about how much it was costing to get one homeless person off of the street into housing. It was like $850,000 per person. I'm like, one, I was shocked the LA Times even did that, because it just it's not their MO.
Yeah.
But two, I mean, it's amazing that we're spending that kind of money just for one person. I go, so maybe these plans aren't necessarily working.
Yeah.
But it also gives you an opportunity to find the programs that are working. And if they are working and they're extremely successful, then we need to replicate those, not the bad ones. And then the other, and this is one of the issues that we're concerned of, is just you have folks that are in this business, the homelessness business, that are connected to people that have the authority to grant that money. So is the money actually being really spent, or is it being spent on CEO salaries?
Yeah.
That type of stuff. It's like, so those are some of the things that an audit would uncover and provide greater accountability and transparency, which I've heard numerous times over the last several years. But yet when it comes to these programs, there is no accountability and transparency. So
yeah, it's interesting. So, and I appreciated the governor's kind of, I think he's being pushed a lot from the press now because of these audit results that said we're not tracking anything. Um, but I would like to see. So I've introduced legislation. I believe it's AB 2903 that would require essentially any state homelessness program to report cost and effectiveness data back
Yep.
to the state
Yeah.
and to the public, right? And so I would love for him to get behind that bill and really put some something in statute to require it. But to your point, the audit uncovered tens of millions of dollars to outside service providers, no accountability, right? And then it also broke homelessness down into three categories where you have prevention, people currently experiencing homelessness, and then people exiting homelessness. The vast majority of those investments are going to that middle category, currently experiencing homelessness.
Right.
We're not helping anyone exit homelessness, and I think that's where we have to ask the question, like, that should be the ultimate goal, right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
should be the ultimate
Absolutely.
goal. And and if you're not doing that, then you're not getting people the help that they need either.
Right.
So,
And also on the homelessness issue, especially when it comes to like the public safety component.
yeah,
I think really that holistic approach where you have law enforcement, you have the social services are
Yeah.
working together in a collaborative format
yeah,
to be able to focus, like you said, focus on that middle group that's currently homeless,
Yeah.
so we can get them out of homeless.
yes,
But if you have all the resources together, working collaboratively together,
Yeah.
then they're all addressing the issue together.
Yeah.
Versus, hey, we don't want the police there because it may be X, Y, and Z issue. But if we're there and there are law-related or judicial, we can start working on those and handling those and
Yep.
making sure that the person's going to get on the right track. Because you still have to resolve some legal issues, unfortunately, with some of the homeless folks. And I think it's just a good match to have everybody there to work on that. But I think that's great if getting that accountability and transparency.
absolutely. I'll skip down real quick and we'll go back. But on that same note, the Grants Pass case
Yes.
starts oral arguments this week. This is essentially, a case that has, I think we were all kind of not necessarily surprised, but even the governor kind of called for this to be heard by the Supreme Court.
Yep.
But they're going to talk about this current Boise versus Martin precedent, essentially, that has been established where you cannot clear an encampment unless you have housing available or shelter available for that individual. This is going to really dive into that issue and whether or not, local governments and law enforcement can take action on encampments. And so I think it's going to be potentially the biggest case on homelessness ever at the national level. And so I was just curious if you had any thoughts on what this means for law enforcement and what you're hoping to see.
Well, I mean, I think I agree with you. I think there's going to be national implications on it. And I think especially here in California because, I think there's just our state is so large that like Southern California does a lot of things differently than Central Valley, Northern California. And hopefully maybe this can refocus everybody to be like, well, clearly the Supreme Court has ruled on whether you can do that, clear the encampments without having the beds available. If that's the case, then I think maybe it'll get the cities to start maybe trying to figure out a way to provide the beds necessary, but still be able to provide the cleanup of the homeless camps because that is an issue. I mean, even here in Sacramento, you drive in some areas and it could be like 2-3 miles of homeless encampments. LA's dealing with that. I think the homeless issue is just it's a big problem. But California, we have so many bright people here.
I know.
And how do we not solve it in this state? I mean, we got Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
We just have so many people that are incredibly intelligent that if we could focus some energy on this, I think we could find a resolution that would solve this issue. And unfortunately, I don't want law enforcement to be the political football in this. Because ultimately that's what happens.
Right.
It's
right.
All these decisions are made in the ivory tower, and then who's out there having to clean those encampments? It's police and social services, and it's like I'd rather have the ivory tower figure out the solution. And then if you need police, we'll come in and handle it. But hopefully we can handle it without having to get us involved.
Yeah. And it's just put you guys in such a tough position because on the one hand, you have the current kind of set of restrictions where there's a lot of limitations on what you can or cannot do, and there's not very much clarity.
Right.
And on the other hand, you have a serious public health and safety issue with these encampments. I mean, whether it's fires, whether it's needles. I mean, I found needles, in my community, which that impacts children, that impacts, community members. And so you guys are in a really tough position on this. And I think, if anything, this case will hopefully at least provide clarity on what you can and cannot do and where the line is.
Yeah, I mean, you get prostitution.
Yep.
There's criminal behavior in there. The homeless. They're having to deal with the fact that they're homeless, and then they're now being victimized by other homeless people.
Yeah.
And it's just this vicious cycle for them, and being able to give them the support necessary to get off of the streets and get into a house, I think, is extremely important. So I agree. I think everybody's watching this case.
Yeah.
And I think it may change some of the way that we do things here in California.
Yeah.
Obviously, it'll change the way things are happening in Oregon. We'll see.
All right, we'll see. Another big story last week was Alameda County District Attorney Pamela Price is now facing a recall. I think that qualified last week.
Yay.
I mean, wow. I just, it's just another Bay Area recall. It's just really interesting to me how, we've seen the Bay Area, different parts of the Bay Area, elect people and then very quickly realize we made a big mistake and act to change that.
Yeah.
I mean, what is your take on this whole, this specifically, you're welcome to share on as well, but, the DAs, obviously we have some amazing DAs in California.
Absolutely.
And then we have some that aren't enforcing the law. And it really seems counterintuitive to what law enforcement should be. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on it.
No, absolutely. We're excited.
Yeah.
I think progressive district attorneys in the state of California are a monstrous disaster for public safety. Yeah. Fortunately, San Francisco, which I never thought would happen.
Me neither.
They recalled Chesa Bodine.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, he's a progressive in a progressive town, so he failed up.
Yeah.
He's now the executive director over at Berkeley Law School, doing whatever he's over there.
Yeah.
Which is shocking, but it is the way it is.
Unfortunately, teaching the future generations now, which is unfortunate.
Well, I think if you get an attorney, recently minted attorney out of Berkeley Law, I'd be a little skeptical on their viewpoint, but I do recognize that Berkeley Law School is probably one of the most preeminent in the nation. But I think when you elect progressive district attorneys, you're taking a risk. It's a huge gamble. We saw it in L.A. with the current DA down there.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
who's also facing his own tough election.
Yeah,
so.
God willing, he doesn't make it through because LA is suffering immensely, and I think you're starting to see that in Alameda.
Yeah.
But they just basically they have no consideration for the victims, none whatsoever. And the worst part about the LA DA is that he was a former peace officer, and to be so callous and non-empathetic towards victims, I find shocking, especially coming out of the law enforcement community, because most peace officers they want to help people.
Yeah.
They want to make sure that people are safe. They want to create vibrant communities. And then you have somebody here that just basically says, I'm not going to enforce a broad set of laws. Mm-hmm. I mean, literally, anecdotally, I was told that, he came out with these policy changes literally like 2 minutes after he was sworn into office. It came out at like 12:01 at night. And we're not going to do anything. And especially the gun enhancements. We're not going to do anything on gun enhancements. So that becomes very problematic for us, because I think in law enforcement, it's a very small core group of people who probably disrupt most of the communities. Yeah. And trying to focus on those people and making sure that, the people that are victimized by them, they get justice too. Mm-hmm. And this isn't just about this criminal who uses a gun illegally. And then, next thing you know, there's all these gun bills that unfortunately are targeting the wrong people. Yeah. And it's like, well, why don't you target these progressive district attorneys who refuse to charge people that use guns in crimes?
In crimes, right.
Go after them,
because
they're the ones consistently doing it, versus the mom and pop or individual who goes through the process of getting a CCW as law-abiding, but because you have these progressive district attorneys who refuse to enforce the law, feel unsafe, and they feel like they need to
protect themselves.
Absolutely, and their family.
Yeah.
So that's what we need to go after.
Yeah.
And these DAs refuse to do that.
It does seem completely backwards. I mean, on the gun enhancement issue, especially, it's, we have a lot of leaders in our state that talk a lot about getting, addressing gun violence. And I care about that too. I think we all do. What better way to address gun violence than holding people accountable for gun crimes, right?
Yeah.
And yet we don't want to do that. We do want to, as you mentioned, there's a bill this year for annual registration requirements for firearms. I mean,
Yep.
things that will make it harder for law-abiding citizens to protect themselves and more cost prohibitive. So it just seems completely backwards who we're going after.
It is, and it's unfortunate. I don't believe you can tax a right.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately what that bill does, and,
Yep.
and we're adamantly opposed to that. And also we're opposed to some other gun bills. And our position really is because you have elected folks that refuse to say we need to go after these criminals. We've coddled criminals for the last several years.
Yeah.
There's no accountability for them, and they're taking advantage. That's what they do.
Yeah.
They victimize people. They take advantage of people. So the state of California said, we're going to coddle you. We're going to let you continue to victimize. And now all of a sudden in an election year, it's a problem.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? It was a problem back then. It's a problem now. Let's still address it, and let's focus on those people and make sure that there's accountability for the crime that they've committed, and the victims is taken into consideration, and they get the justice that they deserve. It doesn't have to be solely about punishment, but the fact is, if you use a gun in a crime, you should spend some time in jail, and maybe you can think about not doing it. But there's this huge push for decarceration. We don't want to put anybody in jail, and it's like, well, I'm sorry. People that rape, people that do bad things to children, pedophilia, those people need to be in jail.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry.
100%.
I tell that to anybody. There are people that need to be in prison.
Yeah.
And probably should never see the day out of prison.
Yeah.
And
you certainly rehabilitate the people you can,
Yep.
but you have to acknowledge that some people can't be rehabilitated,
Absolutely.
and that if they get put back on the street, they will continue to
100%.
victimize people, right?
100%.
No, that's and the other thing too, and I hate to say it, but nobody ever recommends taking the law into your own hands, but people do feel the need to protect themselves. I was just with sheriff's captain in my county, Sacramento County, the other day at a town hall community meeting. And, they're short, I think, over 100 positions understaffed right now at the county for the sheriff's department alone. And their response times are impacted by that. They do everything they can to get to every call, obviously. But the reality is that, our law enforcement are understaffed. They're trying to recruit and train up as quickly as they can. But sometimes you just don't have time to wait for, that law enforcement response. And I think, we have to respect people's right to protect themselves, so.
I agree. And I'm with you. We don't support vigilantism.
Oh, absolutely not.
It's just one of those things. But it was getting to the point where I was like, boy, if we continue this path of decriminalizing crime and continually coddling these criminals, people are going to start doing it. And I think you're starting to see it in just little areas like in New York and Chicago and some other places. And I go, we do not want that.
We don't want that. And that's why it's like, we should really be respecting, obviously, the rights of these law-abiding citizens, but going after the actual criminals.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I agree.
I wanted to ask you about this bill I found interesting, and then we'll move on from the stories. But there was this new bill put forward on drunk driving that would essentially require first-time offenders to install an ignition interlock device on their vehicle. I don't really know. I haven't seen the bill yet, but I was curious what you thought about it.
I don't know if we have a support on it yet because it doesn't sound familiar, but we definitely support the interlock ignitions because
they work pretty well. I mean,
they do. I mean, we hear stories where they get like their friend or their kids will blow into it to release the vehicle. My personal feeling is DUI is a choice. If you go out and drink and you jump in a car, you made the choice. You kill somebody, we're pretty lenient on those people, unfortunately. And I disagree with it, especially in today's day and age. We're getting an Uber or a Lyft or a taxi it's so easy. And if you're going to go out and you're going to drink, then plan on alternative transportation, designate a driver. I just think when it comes to DUIs, we should be stronger in the way that we handle those, because I firmly believe it is a choice.
Yeah.
And you've made a choice, and unfortunately, if you made a bad choice, and there are ramifications for that, and it goes back to that accountability piece.
Right, exactly.
We're moving away from people being individually held accountable for the actions that they choose.
Yeah.
And I think that dovetails back to the protesters on the bridge.
Yeah.
They know they can do it because there's zero accountability. Oh, we're going to sit here and we're going to do all this, and CHP is going to have to spend hours doing this, and we've made our statement, and I'm going to get to go. And nothing's going to happen to me.
Yeah.
And I think when you, like you said, you add some maybe civil components to it or some criminal components, then people may rethink about it and be like, hey, you know what? I don't like this situation. I'm going to protest, but I'm not going to protest in the middle of a freeway. I'm going to protest in a park. I'm going to protest in sidewalks. I'm going to protest in front of City Hall or the state capitol.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it'll be an interesting bill. So I haven't dove deep into it yet, but definitely interested as that continues to move forward. So let's talk a little bit more about PORAC. I mean, we've kind of already talked about a lot of stuff in terms of, the challenges facing law enforcement, but just generally, this year, maybe specifically, what do you see some of the challenges for law enforcement? And then, what do we do about retail theft? I mean, why do these criminals feel so emboldened on obviously retail theft, but also other crimes, which we've talked about. So just curious your general setup, and then we can talk about some of PORAC's bills.
Yeah, obviously, one of the higher priority stuff that we really try to work on is workers' benefits and pay, working conditions type activity.
Yeah.
With that comes a lot of the public safety bills, dealing with the law and order type stuff. Retail theft has been a big issue. We try to support the retail theft bills that we feel are reasonable.
Yeah.
We want to be able to provide resources to agencies to effectively do their job.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that we try to support the DAs, the police chiefs, and the sheriffs, and some of the stuff that they're pushing through. We're doing a little bit more research on stuff, like we have the racial identity profiling board.
Okay. Yeah.
So we've been doing a lot of research on that because we really feel that the reports that are coming out of that they're not good, unfortunately. And so we hired probably one of the most preeminent researchers in racial identity and traffic stops, and he's been analyzing the reports. We've been putting out counter reports, which I'm probably sure you've seen.
Yeah.
So these are some of the things that we're trying to focus on is we want to make sure that if the state is putting out reports, that especially when it's public safety related, that they're accurate and they really have good people doing the research, because what you're seeing is unfortunately you're seeing like a biased creep into the research. They've already determined what the outcome is,
right.
So they're just trying to get the research to align with their biases of what it should look like. And unfortunately, that's what we're seeing out of the RIPA board. So we hired Dr. Withrow. He's analyzing those reports, because if you even look at the RIPA reports over the last several years, they keep changing how they collect the data and what the data means. And I also think, and you probably see this a lot in government, there's a little bit of mission creep.
Yeah.
Now the RIPA board feels like they need to be able to change post in the way that policing's doing business, and it's getting a little bit out of hand. So we try to counter some of that. Obviously, we did a timeline on crime. We started prior to AB 109. We did a deep dive in that, and you can sort of just see the ebb and flow. Where 3 strikes came in, you saw crime dip really big. But obviously, the prison population went up over that, so there was some adjustments. AB 109 kicked in. Then you had I like to call it the summer of love over the last several years. More decriminalization, and then now you're starting to see the downtick. COVID played a big piece in a lot of this.
Yeah.
So
what were the impacts of COVID, just in terms of criminal activity and stuff?
I think with all of the other stuff that was going on, COVID just was one of those denominators that just exponentially increased petty theft and retail theft. And then when it's interesting when criminals are smart in a sense when they see that there's a lack of enforcement or a lack of accountability, or you have that rotating out of the court system, and there's nothing going to make you stay in jail over it. it just starts to explode.
Well, and I guess that is a good point too, because there was so many court closures and
Yes.
delays, and so people weren't really getting held accountable because
Yes.
there was no justice system to really keep them in line.
That
is a good point.
The biggest issue for us on the retail theft is being able to arrest somebody that's committed multiple crimes.
Yep.
They took that away from us.
Yeah.
They're like, well, it's $950 and it was $400 before, but I go, that's not the real issue.
Yeah.
The real issue is somebody who goes from store to store to store to store
Right.
and steals thousands and thousands of dollars, and they're going to walk away with a citation.
Yeah, I know.
Where's the accountability in that? And if you go to one of the progressive district attorneys' counties, like Alameda or LA, they'll be like, nothing happened. What? Yeah, here, go.
Yeah.
Go do it again. Because they don't care.
Yeah. It's unbelievable.
They don't care. That's like the violence you see in Chicago and New York. All those activists over there that support the pro-criminal element. I mean, they're killing people in the communities that need the most help.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of people that are being killed in these communities it's off the hook.
Yeah.
And it's like, is that what you want?
Yeah.
I can't believe you want that. So we try to monitor stuff like that to make sure it just doesn't get too crazy.
Yeah.
And then push back on some of that.
Well, and I think this is where, obviously there was a citizens initiative now on Prop 47 because I think a lot of it came from just the frustration. Obviously, there's DAs backing it and a lot of different folks backing it, law enforcement and community organizations, but it really spurred from this like frustration of this lack of accountability. And they just turned in their 900,000 signatures for qualification, which I think they need 500 something thousand. So it looks like that's going to qualify. And, either voters will have the opportunity to speak on this or, they'll have conversations with the legislature. I don't know exactly what's going to happen yet, but it'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah, I think there's two arguments to that case. You got the one argument where a lot of folks say, hey, the legislature can do X, Y, and Z on the retail theft, so they're going to pass these bills to address those. The people on they're not repealing Prop 47.
Right.
They're making changes to Prop 47. They're saying we don't need that. We can do this through the legislature, but the people that are trying to make changes to the 47 are saying the original Prop 47 said you cannot do any of that. So that falls in your lap up there at the Capitol because you need to who are you going to believe?
Yeah, yeah.
And how do you balance that? So
yeah,
we're supporters of that measure.
Yeah,
I think it's good news that it made it onto the ballot.
At least I think it really boosts the conversation at least, right?
100%.
Because it's it forces us as a legislature to talk about crime, first of all, but it also gives the voters an opportunity to speak out if they choose to do that.
And I think it's important. Just an alternative reason why I think it's important that it gets on there is the fact that you're right. People are going to have a conversation about crime in California when it comes to the 2024 election cycle and who they're putting in office, because clearly there are some folks that you work with up there that they want nothing to do with increasing crimes, increasing penalties, putting anybody in jail, defunding police, defunding the court systems, and they just think
they don't want to light shined on any of that. Right? Yeah,
it's like, hey, a few hugs and this person's going to be great. And I go, that's not true. They're just going to re-victimize you and victimize everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about AB 3241. This is a PORAC sponsored bill. I think one of your biggest priorities this year, specifically related to law enforcement canines. And I know this kind of came from, I mean, I'm sure there's been a lot of talk on this over the years, but last year there was a big bill to really prohibit or limit the use of police canines for apprehension specifically, right? Yeah. Which I was strongly opposed to. I thought that was way too far because, and I've talked to my colleague, Assemblymember Juan Alanis about this, who is a former sheriff's deputy, where, you're trading bites for bullets, essentially. This idea that we would much rather have a dog go into a situation than an officer with a firearm, right? And it's better for even the perpetrator in a lot of ways, right? Yep. So, curious, tell us about this bill and what it's trying to accomplish.
So basically what this bill will do is it will create a statewide standard on the usage of canines. It'll create that accountability and transparency everybody's looking for, because when it comes to the reporting, it'll all be the same. So whether you're from my department in San Diego, LA, San Francisco, all the way up to Eureka, the reporting is going to be the same. It's going to go to the DOJ. We can all analyze that because it's all going to be the same. The other piece is there's going to be consistent, standardized training that, like I said, if you're a canine handler in Eureka, San Francisco, Los Angeles, or San Diego, it's going to be the same. They're all going to be post-certified. The supervisors have to be post-certified in canine handling. So you're seeing it's a very good bill in a sense that you have the accountability piece to track it, because there's some reports out there that I disagree with, in the fact that they're like, oh, well, these are being used on people of color too much. And, it's like the samples they use is an officer was involved in a fight, and the canine officers have remote controls to help. Okay. Popped the door open and the dog got out and actually went after somebody uninvolved in the incident. I go, well, that was clearly an accident.
Right.
The canine handler absolutely had no desire or want for that to happen, but because he's fighting somebody to take him into custody, you're going to hold that against the canine units in the entire state of California.
Wow. Yeah.
There were studies done. We did a study down in San Diego. CHP did a study. We're talking less than 1%.
Yeah, incredible.
And I think when this passes and we start getting the data, it's just going to show you that the ACLU and the reports that they did were just complete bogus.
Interesting.
And we're actually starting to look into those, because we feel, and I'm sure Assemblymember Alanis said the same thing, canines are a great tool. You can't keep taking tools away from law enforcement and expecting greater, less lethal type options.
Right.
If an officer only has a firearm and a baton and a taser, you're limiting these other tools. And canines are great tools. I've been on many, many calls where just having the canine barking in the back of the car, the suspect gave up.
Shuts it down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're going to see that the reports that are done are going to clearly show that canine usage is probably one of the best tools we have out there.
Well, and this is what I loved, have really appreciated about PORAC's approach on this is, you had a bill get put forward last year that I think obviously most of us felt was over the top, way over the line, like completely biased conversation, right, and biased motives. But we're not just dismissing that out of hand, right? Yeah. You guys said, look, here's some things we could improve on canines. Yeah. Training, making training standards more consistent and reporting standards. Yeah. And you brought a bill forward. I think that's just a great way to really put the issue to rest.
And that's one of the things that we try to do. Like, remember all the use of force legislation. We recognize it's like, okay, so we partnered with Senator Ana Caballero, and we ran Senate Bill 230, which standardized use of force training throughout the state of California. Another precedent out of our state. This canine will be another precedent out of the state of California that can be emulated throughout the nation. So whether what state you are in, there's going to be minimum standards on canine usage. There's going to be minimums. We advocate for minimum. We advocate for a standardized use of force policy throughout the United States. That's a whole different animal, and it's going to be extremely difficult. But the reality is we're doing it here in California.
Right.
And hands down to Post, they've had to take on a lot of changes and making sure that the funding's there for them to be able to pick up that work, and then getting it implemented into the police academy. So the new people coming on board are being trained within those guidelines and standards. And then as officers come back annually for their update training, advanced officer training, in-service training, they're getting that. That's why when we talked earlier about how this is sometimes a generational, it takes time to implement this stuff. But the fact that today we're on the forefront of being, we don't want to eliminate a tool, but hey, let's figure out some guidelines and policies to make it better. And that's what this bill and what Assemblymember Pacheco's doing.
Well, and just for the listeners, tell us what POST is real quick. So
POST is the Peace Officers Standards and Training.
Got it.
Their commission.
Yeah.
Their mission is set out, which PORAC created POST back in the 60s. California was ahead of the game.
Yeah.
We were the first state in the nation to have a POST program in the early 60s, and that's their job. They look at best practices. They looked at evidence base, and they create guidelines and policies and training that are implemented in the police academy. And they're just doing a fantastic job. I appreciate Manny. He's the executive director over at Post.
That's great.
And he just hands down he's really done a fabulous job at running Post and making sure that what the intent of the legislature is gets transmitted to Post, and they effectively push it out to all the law enforcement in the state of California.
That's awesome. The really the two things here, right? You've got on the one hand folks that are pushing to really demonize law enforcement, defund the police, really take away tools, and then you've got folks that legitimately want to make policing better. And I think that should always be our goal. Is we should never rest on our laurels. We should always strive to make policing better. But by supporting the officers and giving them training and making sure that we're actually improving standards and training. So it's just it's a really great thing. Thanks for breaking that down for us. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and we I always look at it, and PORAC, we're looking at it. It's like we want to be a profession.
Yeah.
And if you look at any profession, whether it's you're an attorney, a doctor, a nurse, a school teacher, they're all wanting to improve. Us in law enforcement, we should be wanting the exact same thing. We should be wanting to look for new ways to be more effective, less than lethal options available to us, and professionalizing our profession in a sense. So what I try to tell people when I got on in 99, I mean, we had these little square boxes in the car. Sometimes you'd have to hit them on the top to get the report in there. The original tasers were like based off of Star Trek, and now they're much more effective. And it's like it's because technology has improved, and now you're seeing unmanned aerial vehicles are being utilized by law enforcement to find people, to better get information about situations. It's just we should always be trying to improve ourselves, whether you're a human person or whether you're within a profession. So we're striving, being like, hey, we understand your concerns with the way we're doing things. Well, let's take a look at it and let's have a discussion. The problem is a lot of folks on the other side, they don't want to have that discussion because and this is where I think law enforcement, we have a lot of issues with is the fact that people that don't do the profession are telling us to do the profession.
Right.
Nobody in their right mind would tell a doctor how to do cancer surgery, unless you were a doctor or somebody who was a surgeon. But yet, when it comes to law enforcement, everybody seems to be an expert on how it should be done.
Yep,
and it's like, well,
great point.
Pin a badge on, go to a police academy, and show us how it's done. Which they'll never do.
Absolutely. So we're gonna close on our clip of the week. So I'll play you a little clip here. It is on SB 1414, which is the bill to classify solicitation of a minor as a felony in California. I know that's something that you're very familiar with. So let's play this clip of Shannon Grove, the author of the bill, and then we'll get your feedback.
Most of these people standing behind me are survivors that were brutally attacked by their buyers. They're the ones that came to us and said, address the buyer situation, and we did that. The committee forced amendments on us, on my bill that I declined to accept. And it only lessens the impact that we can go after. They want to exclude 16, 17 years old. They want to exclude them from this.
So, this bill was heard, obviously, in public safety last week. Shannon Grove, obviously, has been an amazing champion for victims, right?
Yep.
And last year had the huge human trafficking bill that passed. Apparently, so she had some amendments forced on her on this. Right now, today in California, this crime is a misdemeanor, which to me is mind-boggling in itself, right? And I think to a lot of people that didn't know that, it's shocking that, solicitation of a minor is a misdemeanor in California. But she wants to make it a felony. I support that effort. Committee wanted to exempt 16, 17-year-olds from the bill. What has your kind of viewpoint been on this bill, or just kind of from your perspective, has PORAC taken a position? I don't even know. So
yeah, we obviously support that. I think anything dealing with children needs to be there needs to be greater severity of penalties involved. With that. Senator Grove is an absolute champion in this area, and she gets it. And it's unfortunate that you have some members on the Public Safety Committee that wanted to water down that bill. What I find and what I have a hard time understanding is when it comes to crime and people that commit crime, we're told over and over and over that people cannot discern the difference between right and wrong until they're 24 or 26 based on research that they've done. But somehow, when it comes to sex or buying sex, age of consent is 16.
Yeah.
So how is it when it comes to committing heinous crimes like murder, rape, and all this other stuff, they don't know the difference between right and wrong until they're 24, 26 based on research, but hey, they can go out there and be human trafficked and be sold on the street, and you're okay with it being 16 years old.
It's unbelievable.
I can't wrap my head around that.
Yeah.
The fact that we have people that are in elected office that support that is just, it's unfathomable to me.
Yeah.
I worked on a proposition many years ago about human trafficking, and it was the highest passing proposition in the history of California. It was just, I believe that the vast majority, I'm saying like 80 to 90% of Californians are in my boat.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with kids and under age of 18, they don't, it just, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm a loss for words.
It really is a loss for words. And I think it's also shocking to me because we went through this last year on the bill, SB 14, and it was like, the outcry from the public is really what fixed that. The governor also got involved, to his credit, and really forced the issue. I think ultimately the speaker got involved, but I mean the outrage was really what drove that discussion. And how many times do we have to learn this lesson that when it's about protecting kids, we need to have the most stringent of accountability and make sure that we're fixing these laws that allow their exploitation. You know, so. Anyway, I appreciate your thoughts on that. Any final thoughts before I let you go? I don't want to.
No, I mean, it's like I said, we talked a little bit about earlier, just the, over the last several years, a lot of police reform measures, and making sure that we're taking a look at those. And before we create more police reform measures, let's look and see what those ones did first before we start doing that. But overall, it's a great experience. Thanks for having me on there. Like I said, we could probably talk hours on end about this. And if it was up to you and I'm sure we'd find all the fixes to the problems in California. But,
exactly right. But hey, that's our deliberative process, and really appreciate the work you're doing at PORAC. Obviously, everything PORAC is doing to support law enforcement and really support victims, right?
Yes.
So really appreciate you coming on this week. If anyone has any ideas for future shows, you can email pointoforderpod@gmail.com. Obviously, listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can watch, subscribe, and follow on YouTube, Twitter, X, Instagram, Threads, and Facebook @pointoforderpod. And you can follow today's hosts on Twitter, myself @Joshua_Hoover. Brian is @BrianMarvel, MARVEL. And then you can also follow PORAC @PORAC. Well, I should say PORA California. That's probably a better way to say it. Is where you can follow PORAC and the work that they're doing. But Brian, thanks so much. It was great having you.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.